After I refused to sign the papers, my son reported my own truck as stolen. I was stopped at gunpoint right on the highway. Seeing my 62 years of hard-worked, calloused hands trembling on the wheel, the officer dismissed the other units, turned off the spotlight, and said quietly, "Sir, tell me what happened." I was speechless, never imagining my own family would push me toward death. But they don't know one thing: I've prepared a terrifying gift to expose them at my very own wedding anniversary party. I'm so grateful you're here. To connect, which country or city are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Also, please note, this story includes some fictional elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to names or settings is coincidental, but the message I'm conveying is useful. The boots I heard on the asphalt were measured and deliberate, not the heavy, aggressive stomp of an officer moving toward a suspect. These were the footsteps of someone who had slowed himself down on purpose. I kept my hands flat against the steering wheel, the way the loudspeaker had instructed. The spotlight from the cruiser behind me turned the inside of my truck into something close to daylight, harsh and without shadow. I could see every crack in my knuckles, every callus. 62 years of work mapped out across my palms like a road I had already traveled and could not go back on. The footsteps stopped beside my window. I turned my head slowly and looked into the face of Caleb Owens. He was not in full tactical stance. His right hand was not near his holster. He was standing with his shoulders slightly lowered, the way he stood when he was thinking carefully about something, the same way he stood at my kitchen table on Sunday mornings when he came for breakfast with Sophia. It was the expression of a man trying very hard not to show how angry he was. He reached up and clicked off the spotlight. The interior of my truck went dark, softened by the ambient glow of the city beyond the highway median. He keyed his radio and said something low and firm. Boots retreated. Doors closed. Then Caleb leaned down and rested his forearms on my window frame. "Sir," he said quietly, "tell me what happened." I opened my mouth, and the words did not come. Not right away, because I was still sitting with my hands on a steering wheel I apparently had no legal right to touch, in a truck that apparently no longer carried my name on its title on a highway where my own family had arranged for me to be stopped at gunpoint. I pressed my eyes shut for one breath. Then I said, "Caleb, it is Victor." He did not look surprised. He looked like a man whose worst suspicion had just been confirmed. "Start from the beginning," he said. "Take your time." So I did. I was born outside Albuquerque, the second of 4 children. My father worked construction for 30 years and came home every evening with dust in his hair and a quietness that was not sadness, but the particular peace of a man who had done honest work. He taught me 2 things above everything else: that a man's word is the only currency that cannot be seized, and that you build things with your hands, so something remains after you are gone. I moved to Colorado Springs at 24 with $1,100 and a contractor's license I had passed on the 3rd attempt. I built Torres Construction, from one man eating lunch on whatever surface he happened to be building to 22 employees by the time I was 45. I met Sylvia at a church fundraiser. We married 11 months later. Victor came 4 years after that. Caleb listened without interrupting. Every few minutes he glanced toward the other cruisers. But mostly he watched me with careful, controlled eyes, not just listening to my story, but building something with it. He turned his patrol computer screen toward me. The registered owner of the vehicle I was sitting in was listed as Victor A. Torres. Title transferred 9 days ago. Caleb looked at the screen. Then he looked at me, and his jaw was tight and his eyes were steady, and everything about him said, "I believe you. Every word. Tell me everything," he said. "Let me take you back to the day I was proudest of my son, because that was the day he began to destroy me. It was a Tuesday morning in October 10 years ago. I remember the season because the cottonwood trees along the back fence had gone completely gold. and the light coming through the kitchen window had that particular quality. It only carries in autumn, warm and slightly sideways, the kind of light that makes ordinary things look like they are worth remembering. I was at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee when Victor came downstairs. He was 23 years old that year, sharp-eyed and well-dressed in the way he always was, even on a casual morning at home. He was carrying a manila folder thick with paper pressed neatly against his chest. He sat down across from me and set the folder on the table between us. "Dad," he said, "I need a favor." He explained that he had found a scholarship program, a state-funded education grant for young adults pursuing professional development. The application required a co-signer with an established financial history. Since his own credit was thin, he needed my name on the supporting documentation. He had already filled everything out. He just needed my signature on the highlighted lines. I remember looking at the folder and feeling something swell in my chest that I can only describe as gratitude. Here was my son, 23 years old, taking the initiative to find his own funding, asking me not for money, but simply for the weight of my name. I thought about my father, who never had anyone's name to lean on. I thought about every application I had filled out alone, every loan I had walked into, without a co-signer, every door I had shouldered open by myself. I told Victor I was proud of him. He smiled and opened the folder. This is the part I have replayed more times than I can count in the years since. The part I have turned over in my hands in the dark, in the early hours of the morning when sleep will not come, trying to find the exact moment I should have seen it. Victor placed a single blank sheet of paper on top of the stack before sliding it across the table. He said it was a cover sheet, that the form underneath required my information to be filled in by hand. He uncapped a blue pen, his own pen, one he carried in his breast pocket, and set it beside my right hand. I did not move the blank sheet. I simply signed where he pointed. Page 1, page 3, page 7, page 11. He turned each page with efficiency, his finger indicating the highlighted line, his expression patient and faintly proud, as though he were guiding me through a process he had carefully prepared so that I would not have to think too hard about it. I signed my name 11 times that morning. Sylvia stood at the kitchen counter behind us. She had come down while we were going through the pages, and I remember glancing back at her once, expecting to find her distracted by the coffee or the morning news. Instead, she was watching us. Not smiling exactly. Just watching with an expression I had no framework for at the time and would not understand for another 10 years. When we finished, Victor closed the folder and held it against his chest again. He thanked me. He said it meant a great deal to him. He said I was the kind of father a man was lucky to have. He took the folder with him when he left the table. It did not occur to me until much later that he had not left me a single copy of anything I had signed. At the time, I attributed it to youth, to disorganization, to the simple oversight of a young man still learning how paperwork worked. I made a mental note to ask him for copies later. I never did. Life continued. The business kept moving. The seasons changed. And somewhere in the county records of Boulder, Colorado, a $300,000 mortgage was quietly opened in my name and attached to a property I had never visited. I signed my own financial death warrant that morning. I did it with a proud smile on my face and a second cup of coffee cooling beside my hand. He came to my door on a Tuesday evening, and he was crying. I had not seen Victor cry since he was a boy. Even then, his tears had been brief and purposeful, the kind that stopped the moment they achieved their intended effect. But standing on my front porch that evening, with the autumn wind cutting down from the foothills, he looked genuinely undone. His eyes were red. His shoulders were drawn inward. He was holding his own elbows the way a person holds themselves when they have nothing else to hold on to. I opened the door wider and let him in. He sat on the couch in the living room and pressed his face into his hands. I sat across from him and waited. I had learned over the years that Victor moved through emotions at his own pace, and that pushing him before he was ready only produced silence. After a long moment, he looked up. "It is Sophia," he said. "She is in serious trouble, Dad." My stomach dropped in the way it only drops for your children, that particular freefall that bypasses all logic and lands somewhere in the oldest part of you. He told me that Sophia had borrowed money from people she should never have borrowed from, that the debt had grown beyond what she could manage, that the house in Boulder, the one I apparently co-owned but had never been told about, though I did not know that yet, was going to be seized at the end of the month if someone did not cover $15,000 in overdue payments. He said Sophia was too ashamed to call me herself. He said she had begged him not to tell me, but that he could not watch his sister lose everything without trying. I listened to all of it. I sat in my own living room in the house I had paid for with 40 years of honest work, and I listened to my son describe my daughter's ruin in a voice cracked with apparent grief, and I felt the particular helplessness of a father who has spent his whole life trying to prevent exactly this kind of catastrophe. Then I thought about the money. $15,000 was sitting in a savings account at Wells Fargo on North Academy Boulevard. It had taken me 2 years to set aside. My right knee had been deteriorating for the better part of a decade, bone grinding against bone, in a way that woke me some mornings before the alarm. The orthopedic surgeon at the VA hospital had been recommending a replacement for 2 years. The $15,000 was not for the surgery itself, which the VA would cover. It was for everything the VA would not the home aid. For the weeks I could not drive, the physical therapy co-pays, the months when I would not be able to take on jobs and the business would need to run without me. It was the money that stood between a managed recovery and a genuine crisis. I told Victor I needed to think about it. Something shifted in the room. It was subtle at first. The quality of his stillness changed. The grief that had been radiating from him a moment before seemed to simply switch off, the way a lamp switches off, present 1 second, absent the next, leaving a different kind of darkness behind. He stood up. He was no longer holding his own elbows. "Think about it," he repeated. His voice was flat in a way I had never quite heard from him before. "Sophia is about to lose everything, and you need to think about it." I told him it was not a small amount of money. I told him I had obligations of my own. He picked up the ceramic vase from the end table beside the couch. It was a piece Sylvia had brought from her mother's home when we married, hand-painted, the kind of object that carries 30 years of a life inside it, simply by existing on a shelf. He turned it in his hands, once looking at it, and then he set it back down. Then he swept it off the table with the back of his hand. It hit the hardwood floor and broke into 4 large pieces and a scatter of smaller ones. Neither of us looked at it. "What kind of father," Victor said quietly, "lets his children drown?" It was not a question. It had never been a question. I realized sitting there in the wreckage of something irreplaceable that I had heard those exact words from him before 3 years ago, and 5 years before that, always in a different context, always attached to a different ask, but always the same sentence, always delivered in the same flat, certain tone of a man reading from a script he had long since memorized. He straightened his jacket. "You have 48 hours, he said. He walked to the front door. Sylvia, who had been standing in the hallway without speaking for the entire conversation, followed him without a word or a backward glance. The door closed. I sat alone in the quiet and looked at the broken pieces of the vase on the floor around my feet. The pharmacist's name was printed on a small badge above her left pocket. Maria. She had kind eyes and the practiced efficiency of someone who had been filling prescriptions for a long time, and she looked at me the way people look at someone when they are trying to be professional about a thing that is also privately painful to witness. She ran the card a second time. Then she turned her screen slightly toward me so I could see the words myself. Transaction declined. There were two people in line behind me. I was aware of them in the peripheral way you become aware of witnesses at a moment you would prefer not to have any. I told Maria I would call the bank and come back. She nodded with the particular gentleness of someone who has said nothing unkind and knows it. I took my card back from the counter and walked out of the CVS on North Academy Boulevard into the cold November air and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, not entirely sure what I was feeling. I had carried that card for 11 years without a single declined transaction. I sat in my truck in the parking lot and called the bank. The automated system routed me through 3 menus before connecting me to a representative named Douglas, who had the careful, neutral voice of a man trained to deliver bad news without inflection. Douglas told me that a personal loan had been opened in my name 72 hours ago. The loan amount was $15,000. The annual percentage rate was 340%. The originating lender was a short-term financing company operating out of a registered address in Las Vegas, Nevada. The funds had been disbursed electronically to an account that was not mine within 6 hours of approval. I sat with the phone against my ear and said nothing for a long moment. Douglas asked if I was still there. I told him I was still there. He asked if I had authorized this loan. I told him I had not authorized any loan. He began walking me through the dispute process in the same careful, neutral voice. I wrote down the reference numbers on the back of a gas station receipt I found in my cup holder. My handwriting was not steady. When I hung up, I sat for another minute looking at the parking lot. Then I called Victor. He answered on the second ring, which told me he had been expecting the call. I asked him what he had done. There was a pause on his end. Not the pause of a man caught off guard. The pause of a man deciding how much to reveal. "Your name is not doing anything useful sitting there, old man," he said. I put it to work. I asked him to explain what that meant. "It means your credit score and your social security number are the most valuable things you own at this point," he said. "The business is gone. The savings are nearly gone. But your financial history is still clean. For now." He paused again. "Sign the agreement I left with you, and this goes away. Do not sign it, and things will get considerably more complicated." Then he ended the call. I drove home with both hands on the wheel, and the heat turned up as high as it would go, because I could not seem to get warm. When I got inside, I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the walls of the house I had lived in for 27 years and tried to think clearly. I called Sophia. She arrived in 22 minutes, which told me she had not been far. She came through the door with her laptop bag over one shoulder and took one look at my face and set the bag down on the table without being asked. She opened the laptop. She pulled up my credit file using a monitoring service she had set up on my behalf 2 years ago, something I had let her do without fully understanding what it meant at the time. She scrolled in silence for a moment. Then she stopped scrolling. I watched her face. I had known Sophia's face for 28 years, through every expression it was capable of making. What crossed it now was something I did not have a name for. Something between fury and a very controlled kind of fear. "Dad!" she said, her voice barely carrying across the table. "There is a $300,000 mortgage on your credit file. The property address is in Boulder." Before I reveal the final mind-blowing truth comment, "still here," so I know you're still following this journey. Also, please note, the following part includes some fictional elements added for dramatic effect. If you'd prefer not to continue, feel free to turn off the video now. The morning after Sophia showed me that credit report, I did not sleep. I sat in my recliner by the window watching the Colorado sky shift from black to purple to a pale, washed-out gray, the kind of gray that feels like the world is holding its breath before something breaks. I had a cup of coffee I never drank. I had a phone I did not pick up. I just sat there, 62 years old, a man who had spent his entire life building walls and roofs and floors for other people, realizing that someone had been quietly dismantling everything I had built underneath me. Sophia arrived at 7:15. She had not slept either. I could see it in the careful, deliberate way she moved, like a person who had been thinking for so many hours that her body had simply forgotten to rest. She set her laptop, a yellow legal pad, and 2 gas station coffees on the kitchen table, then looked at me, the way only a daughter can look at her father, with love so fierce, it almost looks like anger. "I found the property address," she said. I set down my empty mug. "Where?" "Boulder, 47 Creekside Drive." I had never heard of that street in my life. Sophia turned her laptop screen toward me. She had pulled the Boulder County property records through the assessor's public database, something she said takes 4 minutes if you know what you are doing, and Sophia always knew what she was doing. The records sat right there, public and searchable in a government database where anyone could find it if they knew to look. 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom. Built in 2001. Quarter acre. Assessed value $342,000. The name listed as mortgagor was Hector A. Torres. My name, my social security number, my date of birth, my old Colorado Springs address from 10 years ago. I read it 3 times. My hands did not shake. I think I was too empty for shaking. "Who lives there?" I asked. "It is listed as a rental," Sophia said. "But the income never went to any account connected to you." She paused, pressing her lips together. "Dad, the rental checks $1,200 a month for 8 years. They were deposited into a business account registered under a company called VT Capital Holdings, LLC. "VT," I said. "Victor Torres," Sophia said quietly. We sat with that for a moment. Outside, a car drove slowly down my street. A dog barked twice and went quiet. Inside my kitchen, the refrigerator hummed, indifferent and mechanical, completely unaware that the world had just tilted sideways. Victor had not just taken a loan in my name. He had been collecting rent on a house that was legally my debt, my liability, my ruined credit, while depositing every dollar into his own company. 8 years. $1,200 a month. $115,200 in rental income that had passed through a property purchased with my name and my signature, and not a single cent had ever come near me. "He owns the LLC," I asked, my voice harder than I intended. "He is the registered agent," Sophia said. "Filed it in Wyoming 7 years ago, minimal disclosure requirements, which is exactly why people use it when they do not want to be traced. But he made a mistake." She typed quickly. "He listed a forwarding address for the LLC, a UPS store in Denver. Box 417. I straightened in my chair. "You tracked it," I told them I was confirming an address for a certified legal document. She allowed herself a small, tight smile that had nothing to do with happiness. "The box is rented under Victor A. Torres. Home address on file 22 Holloway Lane, Denver. The house I helped them move into 4 years ago. I had carried boxes up 2 flights of stairs with a bad knee because Victor told me his back was sore. I had bought them a housewarming gift, a small fiddle leaf fig that Sylvia immediately moved to a corner with no light. It was probably dead within a month. I stood and walked to the window. Denver stretched out below me, ordinary and enormous, full of people, with no idea that a 62-year-old retired builder was standing in his kitchen, discovering that the son he had raised had turned his entire financial identity into a private revenue stream. "We need to see the house," I said. Sophia looked up. "Boulder is 45 minutes away. I know how far Boulder is." I took my jacket from the hook by the door. I want to stand in front of it. I need to see what I am fighting before I understand how to fight it. Sophia closed her laptop without argument. She always understood that some things a person needs to see with their own eyes before any of it becomes real enough to act on. We drove north on Highway 36, the mountains enormous and white to our left, the plains flat and indifferent to our right. Sophia kept her eyes on the road. I kept mine on the dashboard, thinking about a boy who had sat across from me at that same kitchen table 10 years ago, trembling with what I had believed was fear and love and need, and had actually been calculating. 47 Creekside Drive was modest and neat. Light green paint, white trim, a stone path to the front door, a red begonia in a clay pot by the mailbox, a silver sedan in the driveway, a child's bicycle leaning against the porch railing. A family living inside with no idea their landlord was running a decade-deep fraud using a 62-year-old man's name as the foundation. I stood on the sidewalk and could not move for a long time. It was a nice house, the kind of house a man spends a lifetime trying to afford. It was bought with my name. Sophia touched my arm gently. Dad. Her voice was careful the way it gets when she is about to say something that will change the shape of the conversation. I found something else in the county records. There is a second name on the original deed, a co-buyer listed at the time of purchase. She turned her phone toward me. The name was Teresa Torres, my sister's name. I stared at those two words until they stopped looking like words at all, until they became something older and heavier and far more complicated than a name on a document. My sister. My little sister who had driven up from Albuquerque for my wedding and cried happy tears at the reception. My sister who sent birthday cards every year without fail. My sister who I had not seen in 4 years because life had grown busy and distances had grown wide, and I had never thought to ask why. I turned back toward the green-painted house, the red begonia, the child's bicycle leaning in the afternoon sun. Somewhere inside the paper trail, Sophia had only just begun to pull loose. I could feel the outline of something much larger than a mortgage. A plan, a decade in the making, built on the assumption that I would never look closely enough to find it. But I was looking now. Teresa Torres lived 40 minutes north of Boulder, in a pale yellow house on the edge of Fort Collins, the kind of house that looks like it used to hold a lot of warmth before something took most of it away. The front porch had 2 empty chairs and a wind chime that had not been hung straight in years. I had not spoken to my sister in almost 3 years. The last time I called, she told me she was fine and changed the subject every time I asked anything real. I thought she was grieving. I thought she just needed space. Standing on her porch with Sophia beside me, I realized I had been wrong about a great many things. I knocked. 30 seconds. A minute. Then the sound of slow footsteps. The door opened, and Teresa looked at me like she was seeing a man walk out of a burning building, relief and horror at the same time. Her brown eyes going wide, one hand gripping the doorframe so hard her knuckles whitened. "Hector," she breathed. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, and my voice came out rough like gravel, like I had been swallowing rocks all morning. "We need to talk." Her chin trembled. For a moment, I thought she was going to close the door. Instead, she pressed her free hand flat against her chest, like she was trying to hold something inside, and stepped back to let us in. Teresa's living room was neat, in the way that lonely rooms get neat everything in its place, because there was no one around to move anything. Sophia and I sat on the couch. Teresa sat across from us in an armchair, both hands wrapped around a coffee mug she had clearly forgotten to drink, from her eyes jumping between my face and the floor like she could not decide which one was safer to look at. Sophia opened her laptop and turned it toward Teresa. We found the property records for 47 Creekside Drive in Boulder. She said, her voice careful, steady, the voice she uses when she is trying not to frighten someone who is already frightened. Your name is on the original deed. Can you tell us how that happened? Teresa's face crumpled so fast, it looked like something snapped behind her eyes. Her hands shook so violently that coffee sloshed over the rim of the mug and burned her fingers, and she did not even flinch. She set the mug down with a hard clatter and pressed both palms against her face, her shoulders heaving. I knew. She choked out, her voice muffled behind her hands. I knew someday somebody was going to come to this door and ask me that question. I prayed it would be you, Hector. I prayed it would not be a detective. I leaned forward and put my hand on her knee. Teresa, look at me. She dropped her hands. Her eyes were red, wet, and full of something that had been locked up for a very long time. He told me it was an investment. She said, her voice breaking on every other word. Victor came to me 15 years ago. He was 18 years old. 18, Hector. He wore that little gray sweater you bought him for Christmas, and he sat right where your daughter is sitting, and he told me he had found an opportunity, a property investment, a chance to build something for the family. He said you had approved it. He said you wanted to keep it quiet because you did not want Sylvia involved in the finances yet. My jaw tightened. He used my name to get you to sign. He used your trust, Teresa said, and her voice came out like a wound. He showed me a document with your signature. He said you had already signed, that all he needed was a co-signer to satisfy the bank requirement. I was so proud. I thought my brother had finally found a way to build real wealth. I signed everything he put in front of me. Sophia's hands had stopped moving over the keyboard. Her jaw was tight, her eyes bright with barely contained fury. What happened after that? Sophia asked. Teresa let out a sound that was half laugh and half sob. 3 months later, the bank called me. There were missed payments on the loan. I called Victor. He told me not to worry, he would handle it. Then a letter came to my address, a collections notice, for $47,000. Her voice rose and cracked at the top like a branch in wind. I had to drain my entire savings account, my retirement fund, Sophia. Every dollar I had put away for 20 years. Gone. Victor told me if I reported it, he would show documents proving I had been in on it from the beginning. Forged documents. He said he had receipts, emails, fabricated all of it, but enough to ruin me. She pressed her fist against her mouth and squeezed her eyes shut. Tears ran freely down both cheeks and dripped off her chin. When she opened her eyes again, they were raw and desperate, locked onto mine. I was afraid, Hector. I was afraid of a child I watched you raise. What does that tell you about what kind of monster he grew into? My chest felt like it was caving in. Not with anger, the anger came later. Right then, it was something older and heavier, the specific pain of a man who realizes that the damage done in his own house spread far beyond the walls he thought he was protecting. My sister. My sister had been carrying this alone for 15 years, while I sat 40 minutes south and believed the whole family was fine. I stood up from the couch. My legs felt unsteady, like the floor had shifted an inch to the left without warning. I crossed to Teresa's chair and pulled her into a hug, and she came apart, completely sobbing against my shoulder. Her whole body shaking, 15 years of swallowed terror finally breaking the surface. I am sorry, I said into her hair. My own eyes burned so badly I had to blink hard and fast to keep myself standing. I am so sorry I did not come sooner. You did not know, she whispered. He made sure nobody knew. Sophia's voice came from behind me, quiet, but iron steady. Teresa, do you still have anything from that time? Any documents, any letters, anything at all he gave you? Teresa pulled back and wiped her face with the back of both hands. She took one shaking breath, then another, then straightened up in her chair with the kind of tired dignity that belongs only to people who have survived things alone. I have everything, she said. I kept every single piece of paper. I kept the original documents, the collections notices, the letters, and I kept his old phone. Sophia looked up sharply. His phone, he left it here the night he came to threaten me. Teresa's voice had gone very quiet now, not small, but controlled like a person who has just decided that being afraid is finished. He does not know I still have it. He forgot or he did not care. He was 20 years old, and he thought I was too broken to matter. She stood up, walked to the back of the house, and came back carrying a small wooden box, the kind you buy at a craft store, and fill with things you are not ready to throw away, but cannot bear to look at every day. She set it on the coffee table and lifted the lid. Inside, neatly stacked and held together with a single rubber band, was 15 years of evidence. And sitting on top of everything in a cracked black case with a scratched screen, a phone that had not been turned on in 15 years. Sophia stared at it. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were bright and fierce, and for the first time since Tuesday, something in her face looked less like fear and more like the beginning of a plan. "We are going to need a forensic data recovery specialist," she said. We drove back to Denver as the sun dropped behind the Rockies and turned the sky the color of a bruise, deep purple bleeding into orange at the edges, beautiful the way painful things sometimes are. Sophia had the evidence box on her lap, the entire drive, her fingers resting on the lid like she was guarding something alive. She did not open it in the car. She was waiting until we got to my apartment where the light was better and she had her full setup. I kept both hands on the wheel and tried to keep my mind from running too far ahead. That was the hardest part. Not the evidence, not the phone, not even Teresa's face when she finally broke down. The hardest part was the drive home, the ordinary 40 minutes of highway and exit signs and radio static. When I had nothing to do but think about what kind of man raises a son for 20 years and never once sees what is being built in the dark right beside him. "So, Dad," Sophia said without looking up from the box. "Stop doing that." "Doing what?" "Blaming yourself. I can hear you thinking from over here." I almost smiled. Almost. "You cannot hear thinking." "I can hear yours," she said. "You get this specific tension in your jaw, like you are chewing on something you refuse to swallow." Back at my apartment, Sophia spread Teresa's documents across the kitchen table in organized rows, originals on the left, copies on the right, the collections notices in a separate stack. She photographed everything with her phone before touching any of it, methodical and precise the way she approaches every problem. I made coffee neither of us needed and stood by the counter watching her work. That was when she stopped. She was holding a single sheet of paper, not a financial document, not a legal form. It looked like a printed receipt, narrow and pale, the kind that curls at the edges after sitting in a box for years. She read it once, flipped it over, read the back, then set it flat on the table and pressed both hands down on it like she needed to feel it was real. "Dad," she said. Her voice had changed. Something in it had gone very still and very sharp at the same time. "Come look at this." I crossed to the table. She moved her hand so I could read it. It was a pharmacy receipt. Printed on the heading was the name of a compounding pharmacy in Denver, a small specialty outfit, not a chain. The date on the receipt was 14 months ago. The prescription was made out to Hector A. Torres. The medication listed was a compound of scopolamine derivatives and a low-dose sedative blend described in the notes field as a cognitive support supplement for early-stage memory management. I had never been to that pharmacy in my life. "I do not understand," I said. "I never ordered anything from this place." Sophia's jaw was tight. her eyes scanning the receipt with the focused intensity she usually reserves for data anomalies at work. "This is not a prescription you ordered," she said. "Someone ordered this for you. Look at the pickup name." I leaned closer. In the pickup field, written in small, printed letters, V. Torres. The air went out of the room. "Ma Victor picked up a prescription written in my name," I said. The words felt strange in my mouth, too large, too wrong to fit comfortably in any sentence. For a medication I never knew I was taking, Sophia straightened up, and when she turned to face me, her eyes were blazing with a fury so clean and cold, it was almost frightening. "Dad, think back. The past year, have you had moments where you felt foggy, confused about things you should have remembered easily, times where you could not recall a conversation or a date clearly?" My stomach dropped, because the answer was yes. "See, I thought it was age," I said. My voice came out quieter than I intended. "I thought my memory was just, I am 62, Sophia. I thought it was normal." "It is not normal," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth and took one sharp breath, fighting something back hard. When she lowered her hand, her chin was trembling. "He was drugging you, Dad. He was keeping you foggy enough that you would not look too closely at your finances. Foggy enough that if you ever questioned something, you would doubt yourself before you doubted him." I grabbed the counter behind me with both hands. My knees felt genuinely unreliable for a moment, the kind of weakness that comes from your body processing something your mind is not yet ready to accept. 62 years old. A man who built things with his hands, who prided himself on clarity and hard work and knowing his own mind, and someone had been quietly, deliberately clouding that mind one pill at a time. How cool I managed. I never took anything from him. Sophia wiped her eyes, fast, angry at her own tears, and pulled out her laptop. "Think harder. Coffee, food, did Victor or Sylvia ever bring you anything, meals, supplements, vitamins?" And then it hit me, like a fist. "Sylvia," I said. "Every Sunday for the past 18 months. She brings me a thermos of horchata. She said it was because she said she was worried about my blood sugar, and she had added supplements. I drank it every week." My throat tightened until the words barely came out. Every single week. Sophia made a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a gasp. She spun back to her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Scopolamine derivatives in low doses cause short-term memory disruption, reduced critical thinking, and increased suggestibility." She read aloud, her voice shaking with barely contained rage. "They are odorless and nearly tasteless when dissolved in liquid. Hector, Dad, this is how he was planning to use you at the anniversary party. They were not just going to pressure you into signing. They were going to make sure your mind was slow enough that you would not understand what you were signing." I let go of the counter and sat down hard in the kitchen chair. My hands were shaking, not trembling, shaking the way they did the first winter I worked construction in Colorado and could not feel my fingers. 62 years of a clear mind. 62 years of building and deciding and knowing my own name in every room I walked into. And for 18 months, every Sunday morning, I had been drinking poison handed to me by a woman I called my wife. "We keep this receipt," I said. My voice did not shake. I was surprised by that. "We keep it with Teresa's documents, and tomorrow we find out who authorized that prescription." Sophia looked at me across the table, eyes red but fierce. "I already have the pharmacy's license number," she said. "I am going to find out exactly which doctor signed that script." She turned back to her laptop. I stared at the receipt on the table. Outside, Denver hummed along, indifferent and enormous, full of people having ordinary Sunday evenings with families who did not poison them. I thought about every Sunday morning for the past 18 months. The cold thermos, the sweet, familiar taste, Sylvia's careful smile as she handed it to me. And I finally understood why she had always watched me drink every last drop. They came on a Wednesday evening just after 7 o'clock, when the sky outside my window had gone fully dark and the streetlights had switched on along my block. I heard the knock and knew before I opened the door. There is a particular sound to a knock that is not asking permission, heavier than a visitor, sharper than a friend, the kind of knock that carries a decision already made on the other side of the wood. I opened the door. Victor was wearing a charcoal blazer over a white shirt, pressed and neat, like a man arriving for a business meeting, rather than his father's apartment. His face was composed, unreadable, the expression of someone who has rehearsed this moment many times in private. Behind him, Sylvia stood in her good coat, the navy one she saves for occasions she considers important. Her hands folded in front of her, her pearl necklace catching the hallway light. She was smiling, that smile. I had loved that smile for 30 years. Right then, it looked like the most dangerous thing I had ever seen. "Hector," Victor said, "can we come in?" "You are already in the hallway," I said. "What do you want?" Something flickered across Victor's face, not quite irritation, not quite surprise. He was not accustomed to me speaking first. "We need to talk about the agreement. The 48-hour window closes tomorrow morning. I think we should handle this like adults face to face." I stepped back and let them in. Not because I was afraid, because Sophia had asked me to. She had spent all of the previous night preparing, and her exact words that morning had been, "Let them walk in, Dad. Let them feel like they are winning. People who feel like they are winning get careless." Victor sat at my kitchen table like he owned it. He set a manila folder in the center, smoothed it flat with one hand, and folded his fingers together on top of it. Sylvia took the chair to his left, crossed her ankles, and looked around my apartment with the quiet, assessing expression of a woman cataloging what she was about to inherit. "This does not have to be complicated," Victor said. His voice was warm, almost gentle, the voice he had used since childhood, when he wanted something badly enough to be charming about it. "The debt exists, Dad. It is in your name. Fighting it will take years and cost more than the debt itself. The smart move, the peaceful move, is to sign the assumption agreement. We absorb the liability, the mortgage transfers. Your name comes off everything." "And the $15,000, I asked. "Consider it a processing fee," he said, without blinking. My hands were flat on the table. I kept them flat deliberately because they wanted to curl into fists, and I could not afford that yet. "A processing fee," I repeated. "Hector." Sylvia's voice came in smooth and practiced like warm water over sharp edges. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her fingers were cool. Her rings pressed into my knuckles. "We are not your enemies. We are your family. This is the cleanest way through this. You sign, the pressure is gone, and we all move forward. Victor and I will handle everything from here." I looked at her hand on mine. 30 years of marriage. 30 years of Sunday mornings and holiday dinners, and the small daily architecture of a shared life. And for 18 of the most recent months, she had been carrying a thermos of horchata across town every Sunday, pressing it into my hands and watching me drink something that slowly made me unsure of my own memory. "You look tired, Hector," she said softly. "You have been under so much stress. Let us carry this for you." Something burned at the back of my eyes. I blinked it back hard and fast. Victor slid the folder toward me and flipped it open. Inside was a thick document, 15 pages, dense with legal language. He produced a pen from his inside jacket pocket, a heavy silver pen, expensive looking, and set it beside the folder with a small, precise click. "Page 12, he said. "That is where you sign. Mr. Crane reviewed everything this morning. It is clean." I looked at the pen. I looked at page 12. I looked at Victor's composed, patient face, the face of a man who has never once doubted that this moment would go exactly the way he planned it. "Can I read it first?" I asked. Victor's jaw tightened by a fraction. "It is 15 pages of standard legal language, Dad. You do not need to. I am 62 years old," I said. "I have been signing documents my whole life. I read everything before I sign." Sylvia laughed lightly, a social laugh, the kind designed to make a room feel warmer. "Of course, Hector. Take your time. We are in no rush." I picked up the first page. I did not read it. I could not have processed a single word right then, even if my life depended on it. But I held it, and I turned the pages slowly, and I made Victor and Sylvia sit in my kitchen for 22 minutes, watching me pretend to read, because Sophia had told me to stall, and stalling was the one thing I could do without falling apart. On minute 19, Victor shifted in his seat. On minute 21, Sylvia uncrossed her ankles and recrossed them. On minute 22, my phone buzzed once on the counter, Sophia's signal. She was in position. Everything was ready. I set the document down. I picked up Victor's silver pen. I held it over page 12. And then I looked up at Victor directly, steadily, in a way I had not looked at him in years, maybe ever, and said, "Before I sign this, I have one question." Victor's eyes were careful. "What question?" "How long have you known that you are not my son?" The color left Victor's face so completely and so fast that for one moment he looked like a man who had just stepped off a ledge and had not yet started falling. Sylvia's hand shot to her pearl necklace, and somewhere in the kitchen, very softly, a recording began. Before I went to bed that night, I did one more thing. I walked to the coat rack by the door where Sylvia had hung her navy coat while she sat at my table. Her pearl necklace was coiled in the outer pocket. She had taken it off during the meeting, the way she sometimes did when she was warm. I picked it up carefully, held it in my palm for a moment, and then set it in the small dish on my counter where I keep my keys. Sophia had called me that afternoon with a plan. James Whitfield, at Whitfield Digital Forensics in Aurora, could install a lens the diameter of a pinhead into one of the pearls connected to a micro-transmitter, small enough that no one would ever see it. He needed 36 hours. We had exactly that. In the morning, I would give it to Sophia, and she would drive it straight to Aurora. That Sophia had told me was enough. The front door opened before Victor could find his voice again. Sophia walked in like she had been standing on the other side of that door for exactly the right amount of time, which she had. She carried her laptop open in one arm, her phone mounted on a small tripod in the other, the camera already facing outward, the red recording dot already glowing. She set the tripod on the kitchen counter in one clean motion, angled it toward the table, and turned to face Victor and Sylvia with an expression so controlled it was almost frightening. "Good evening," she said. Sylvia's chair scraped back 2 inches. "What is this? What is she doing here? I live 40 minutes away," Sophia said pleasantly. "And my father called me." She glanced at her phone screen. "We currently have 214 people watching this conversation. That number is going up." Victor stood up so fast, his chair nearly tipped. His composure, that carefully constructed, expensive-looking composure, cracked straight down the middle. His face went red, then tight, then red again, cycling through emotions too fast for any one of them to land cleanly. He jabbed his finger at the phone. "Turn that off." His voice had lost every trace of warmth. What was underneath was harder and colder than anything I had ever heard from him. "Turn it off right now, Sophia. You have no idea what you are doing." "I have a very clear idea of what I am doing," Sophia said, pulling out a chair and sitting down with her laptop open in front of her. I am having a family conversation in my father's home about documents signed in his name without his knowledge. She looked directly into the camera. We are going to be transparent about everything tonight. This is illegal, Sylvia said sharply. Her fingers worked over the pearls at her throat in slow, anxious circles. You cannot film someone in their private home without consent. Colorado is a one-party consent state. Sophia said, her voice almost academic. My father consents. That is sufficient. And before you call your attorney, Mr. Crane already received a certified letter from a Denver law firm at 4 o'clock this afternoon. He knows. Victor's mouth opened, closed. He looked at me, and for the first time in all the years I had known him, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen there before. Not performance, not strategy. Actual fear, raw and unmanaged, the kind that lives behind everything a person builds to protect themselves when they are not sure the foundation will hold. I met his gaze and held it. Sit down, Victor, I said. He sat. What followed was 41 minutes I will carry for the rest of my life. Sophia ran the conversation, the way she runs her data projects, structured, precise, never raising her voice, never losing the thread. The $300,000 mortgage. VT Capital Holdings, LLC. 8 years of rental income deposited into Victor's private company. The pharmacy receipt. The scopolamine compound. The Sunday horchata thermos Sylvia had pressed into my hands every week for 18 months with a careful smile and a gentle voice asking how my knee was feeling. With every item Sophia named, Sylvia's expression shifted surprise to calculation, to a cold, thin fury that settled over her face like a mask pulled too tight. Victor sat with his arms crossed, jaw, working eyes moving between Sophia's screen and the viewer count climbing on the live stream. 340, 412, 507. You want to play it this way? He finally said, leaning forward, voice dropping low and dangerous. My attorney will have this stream taken down within the hour. Then he files a defamation suit against both of you that costs more than that mortgage ever did. Sophia smiled, small, certain, the smile of a woman holding cards she has not shown yet. That sounds like something a person says when they are completely out of real options. This stream is being archived simultaneously to 3 cloud servers and 1 external hard drive at a location I will not be sharing tonight. Sylvia grabbed Victor's arm. We should leave right now and let the lawyers... Teresa sends her regards, Sophia said. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Sylvia's hand froze on the pearl necklace. Victor's chin came up slowly, and when he looked at Sophia, the fear in his eyes had sharpened into something uglier and more desperate. You went to Fort Collins, he said, not a question. We did, Sophia said. She is doing well. Better than she has in years. People tend to feel better once they stop carrying something alone. She also gave us some things that belong to you. We will discuss those at a more appropriate time with more appropriate people present. Victor shoved back from the table, shaking not with fear, but with the specific trembling of rage that has nowhere left to go. He pointed at Sophia, then at me, his finger unsteady and his eyes wet with a fury he could no longer contain. You have no idea, he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, what you are starting. I know, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. We know exactly what we are finishing. I stood and looked at my son, the boy I had carried on my shoulders at the state fair when he was 4, the boy I had taught to ride a bike in a parking lot on a Saturday morning, and I felt grief and fury and something harder than either all at once in the same breath. You have 48 hours to withdraw every document, every claim, and every legal threat. After that, we take everything to Detective Miller at the Financial Crimes Unit. Every receipt, every record, every recording. Victor grabbed his jacket without another word. Sylvia followed her heels, sharp and deliberate, on my floor. At the doorway, she turned and looked at me one last time, something between contempt and a sorrow she would never in her life admit to. Then they were gone. Sophia ended the live stream, set her phone face down on the table, pressed both palms flat on the surface, and let her head drop forward. 893 viewers, she said without lifting her head. At peak. I walked around the table and put both arms around my daughter. She straightened up and hugged me back so hard I felt it deep in my ribs, her whole body trembling, with 41 minutes of adrenaline finally finding somewhere to go. "You were magnificent," I told her. She laughed real wet at the edges, half relief and half pure exhaustion. I was terrified the entire time. My hands were shaking under the table for the first 20 minutes straight. "I know," I said, "mine too." We stood there in my kitchen, holding on, while outside the Denver night went on without us, indifferent, enormous, and for the first time in days, not entirely dark. We had 48 hours, and we intended to use every single minute of them. I did not sleep that night either, but it was a different kind of wakeful. The first nights had been the hollow, helpless kind, lying in the dark, with nothing but weight pressing down on my chest. This night was different. This night I lay in the dark with my mind running clean and fast, like water finally finding the channel it was meant to move through. At 5:30 in the morning, I got up, made coffee, and called Caleb. He answered on the second ring, sharp and ready, like a person who had been lying in the dark, waiting for exactly this call. Caleb Owens was not the kind of man who answered his phone at 5:30 in the morning with a groggy voice and slow thinking. "Hector," he said, "tell me what you need." That sentence alone was enough to make my eyes sting. Not many people in a man's life will say those exact words, not what happened. Not "are you sure?" Not "do you think that is a good idea?" Just tell me what you need. I took one slow breath before I trusted my voice enough to speak. "The truck," I said. "Victor registered it in his name 9 days ago. I park it in a covered garage 2 blocks from here. The building has security cameras. I need someone to pull the footage." "Oh, which garage?" Caleb asked. I could already hear him moving the soft sounds of a man getting dressed while he talks. "Morrison Street parking, level 2, space 44. 6 years I have been parking there." "I know people at the property management company," Caleb said. "Give me 2 hours." Sophia arrived at 8 o'clock with breakfast sandwiches and Victor's old phone sealed in a clear evidence bag. She had spent part of the previous night on the phone with James Whitfield, a former FBI contractor running a private digital forensics firm in Aurora, who had agreed to see us at 11 that morning. "How is the phone?" I asked. Old Sophia said, pulling apart a sandwich with the efficient energy of someone running on 3 hours of sleep and pure determination. "Cracked screen, dead battery, 15 years of dust. James says he can get into it if the storage chip is intact. If Victor was using that phone to coordinate the original mortgage fraud, there may be texts, emails, even photos. 15 years old, but recoverable. And if the chip is damaged," Sophia chewed, swallowed, and met my eyes steadily. "Then we work with what we have." "But Dad..." She pointed the remaining half of her sandwich at me for emphasis. "We already have enough to take to Detective Miller. The pharmacy receipt alone is a felony. The LLC rental income is tax fraud. The forged mortgage documents are federal wire fraud. We do not need the phone to have a case. But if James pulls those records, it becomes airtight," I said. "It becomes the kind of case," Sophia said, "that a defense attorney cannot touch." My phone buzzed on the counter. "Caleb," I put him on speaker. "I have the footage," he said, and his tone told me everything before the words "did low" controlled the specific register of a police officer who has seen something that made him angry in a professional way. "Hector, you need to see this." Caleb arrived 40 minutes later with his laptop and a USB drive. He pulled up the file and hit play without preamble. Timestamp 11 days ago, 2:17 in the morning. Gray and slightly grainy the way garage cameras always are, but clear enough. A figure moving through level 2 with a small flashlight threading between parked cars until it reached space 44, my truck. A dark green Ford F-150 I had owned for 9 years, carried lumber in it, tools my daughter's college furniture, and once a rescued stray dog I found on I-70. My name on the title, my registration in the glove box, my emergency kit behind the driver's seat. The figure bent over the door lock, a slim tool in and out, practiced and quick. 12 seconds. The door opened. The figure climbed in, and in the moment before the door closed, the flashlight caught their face. Sylvia. Sophia made a sound beside me that was not a word, a compressed noise of something hitting too hard and too fast to become language. She pressed both hands over her mouth and stared at the screen, her eyes wide and bright with tears she refused to let fall. Caleb leaned forward. She has a Slim Jim tool. That is a professional lock bypass instrument. You do not just own one of those. You acquire one deliberately. He paused. She also has a folder. Watch. On screen, Sylvia reached into her coat, spread a document folder on the passenger seat, and wrote for approximately 90 seconds. Then she gathered everything, tucked the folder back into her coat, reached back in one final time, and placed something small on the dashboard. What did she put there? I asked. Caleb reached into his shirt pocket and held up a small evidence bag. Inside a folded DMV title transfer form completed in full, Victor Torres, listed as new owner, my signature forged in the transfer box. She filled it out in your truck in your garage at 2:17 in the morning and left it for Victor to file the next day. My jaw tightened until it ached. I thought about every Sunday Sylvia had handed me that thermos of horchata with a gentle smile and called me my love and asked if my knee was feeling better. She had a key, I said. My voice came out flat and strange. I gave it to her 2 years ago in case of emergencies. Caleb nodded slowly. People usually give their family access to things, he said carefully, because they trust them. The word trust landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. I felt the ripple move through my chest and keep going. Sophia lowered her hands from her mouth. Her cheeks were wet. She wiped them fast, impatient with her own tears, and straightened in her chair. We need to get this footage to Detective Miller. The title transfer form, the pharmacy receipt, Teresa's documents, everything. Caleb already made 2 certified copies. He reached into his bag and produced 2 sealed envelopes. One for Miller, one for our own record. He looked at me with the steady, uncomplicated loyalty that a man spends a lifetime hoping to find. Hector, we have 31 hours left of the 48. Time to call Miller directly. I looked at those 2 envelopes on my kitchen table. Evidence clean and documented and real, the kind that does not bend under pressure or change its story depending on who is in the room. Make the call, I said. And for the first time in a very long time, the weight on my chest shifted. Not gone, not even close to gone, but different. Less like drowning. More like standing waist-deep in moving water, finally finding solid ground beneath my feet. James Whitfield's office in Aurora did not look like what I expected. I had pictured something clinical and cold, white walls, humming servers, recycled air. Instead, it was a converted Victorian house on a tree-lined street, warm and slightly cluttered bookshelves, covering every wall a pair of old leather chairs, facing a desk, holding more monitors than I had ever seen outside of a movie. James himself was compact mid-50s, close-cropped gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the unhurried manner of someone who has seen enough crises to know that panic never recovered a single byte of data. He shook my hand, shook Sophia's, and held out his palm for the Ziploc bag without being asked. "Let me see what we have," he said. He turned the bag over slowly. Samsung, older model, impact stress on the lower left corner. He looked up at Sophia over his glasses. 15 years in storage. "Wooden box in my aunt's closet," Sophia said. "Fort Collins, dry climate." James pressed his lips together in the expression of a man doing quiet calculations. "Dry storage is good. I will not open it until I have imaged the exterior completely." He set the bag on a padded tray. "Come back at 3. I will have a preliminary report." "What are the chances?" I asked. He looked at me with the direct, honest eyes of a man who did not deal in comfortable reassurances. "Better than you might think. Worse than you might hope. Come back at 3. From James's office, we drove directly to the Financial Crimes Unit on Champa Street. Detective Rachel Miller met us in a third-floor conference room, tall, early 40s, sharp, dark eyes, a no-nonsense gray blazer, and the particular quality of attention that belongs to people whose entire professional life consists of listening for the detail that does not fit. She listened without interrupting once. Sophia laid everything across the table in organized rows, originals, left copies, right pharmacy receipts separate, garage footage on a USB drive, the DMV title transfer form, Teresa's documents, the credit report, the Boulder County property records, the VT Capital Holdings LLC registration. When Sophia finished, Miller picked up the pharmacy receipt and examined it with the focused attention of a woman who has learned that small pieces of paper sometimes carry the largest crimes. "Scopolamine derivative compound," she said. "Prescribed to you, picked up by your son, administered without your knowledge or consent." She set it down and looked up at me. "Mr. Torres, what you are describing is not a family dispute. What you are describing is a decade-long criminal enterprise conducted by members of your household." My throat tightened. Hearing it said out loud, plainly by a law enforcement officer, it made it real in a way that all the documents and receipts and footage had not quite managed. "I can have an emergency asset freeze motion filed by end of business today," Miller said, picking up her pen. "I will have the emergency asset freeze motion filed and in front of a judge before 5 o'clock this afternoon. If it is approved and given what you have brought me today, I have every reason to believe it will be no funds connected to VT Capital Holdings, LLC, will move after close of business." Sophia exhaled so hard she had to press her hand to her chest. "Thank you," she said, and her voice broke on the second word in a way she clearly had not planned for. She straightened immediately, blinking fast. "I am sorry. Do not apologize," Miller said, and her voice shifted, not softer exactly, but warmer the way a person's voice changes when they stop being professional and become human. "What your family has been through is not a spreadsheet. It is allowed to hurt. We were back at James's office at 3 o'clock exactly. He was standing rather than sitting, which told me something before he opened his mouth. On the largest monitor behind him, a grid of recovered data. Text threads, email fragments, photographed documents, all pulled from a phone that had been sitting in a Fort Collins closet for 15 years. The chip was intact," James said, allowing himself a small note of professional satisfaction. "Dry climate saved it. I recovered approximately 73% of the original data." Sophia grabbed my arm so hard I felt it through my jacket sleeve. "What did you find?" James pointed to the screen. "Text messages between Victor Torres and a contact saved as St. Sylvia Torres. The earliest message is dated 16 years ago." He read it aloud. "Get the old man used to signing things without reading. Start small. Build the habit." The room lurched. I grabbed the edge of the desk with one hand, the leather creaking under my grip. 16 years ago. Victor had been 17 years old, and Sylvia had already been writing him instructions. "There is more," James said. 14 years ago, messages discussing the Boulder property specifically. ST writes, quoting directly, "The mortgage is in place. He will never check. He trusts us completely. That is his weakness and our foundation." Sophia made a sound beside me that was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. She pressed her hand over her mouth, her eyes flooding, and this time she did not fight the tears. They ran freely down her face, and she let them standing straight, shoulders back, crying with the dignity of a woman who has earned every one of those tears. "His weakness and our foundation," I repeated. My voice came out hollow, an echo of itself. 30 years of building a life with a woman who had looked at my trust, the most honest thing I had, and called it a weakness to be used. "Dad." Sophia's voice was thick but steady. She took my hand in both of hers. "Look at the screen. Keep looking." I looked. James scrolled forward. Email fragments from 10 years ago coordinating the signature session, the scholarship papers, the blank page overlay the 11 signatures. He paused. And one more item. He opened an image file. A photograph of a handwritten note on plain paper in Sylvia's distinctive leftward slanting script. "AI analysis will be the only thing that can break the signatures. Make sure the pen matches. Blue ink only. Same brand every time." My blood ran cold. She had anticipated it. Years ago, she had anticipated forensic signature analysis and tried to engineer around it before it could be used against her. She tried to defeat the analysis before it existed. Sophia said, her voice hushed with the specific feeling of recognizing a plan so elaborate, it almost commands a terrible respect. She tried, James said. He turned from the monitor and held out a printed report. But consistency is not the same as authenticity. The pressure pattern, the micro-tremor baseline, the letter formation sequence, the signatures on the mortgage documents were made by Victor Torres. Not you. Sophia took the report with both hands. She read the top section, then pressed it against her chest, and looked up at the ceiling and let out one long, shaking breath, the kind that carries everything a person has been holding for days. "It is enough," she said. "Dad, it is enough." I looked at James. He nodded once, the quiet nod of a man confirming something important. I thought about Sylvia writing that note. His weakness and our foundation. I thought about 30 years of Sunday mornings and holiday dinners and a thermos of horchata pressed into my hands with a careful smile. And I thought about tomorrow night. The anniversary party. Victor's silver pen. Page 12. They were still planning to finish this. But so were we. The invitation had been sitting on my refrigerator for 3 weeks, held up by a magnet shaped like the Colorado state flag. 30 years of marriage, it said across the top in silver script. A celebration of family love and legacy. The venue was a private event hall in Cherry Creek, the kind of place with valet parking and waitstaff in white gloves and floral arrangements that cost more than my first month's rent in Colorado Springs. I had planned to go alone. That was before Tuesday. Now I stood in my bedroom at 6 o'clock in the evening, knotting my tie in the mirror, and Sophia stood behind me adjusting her earrings, and Caleb sat on the edge of my bed in his good suit, checking his phone with the quiet focus of a man running a mental checklist. He has gone over many times already. "Miller confirmed 20 minutes ago," Caleb said without looking up. 2 plainclothes officers already inside. 2 more in the parking structure. She will be in the vehicle on Fillmore Street with the warrant ready. "The warrant covers both of them," Sophia asked. "Wire fraud, identity theft, criminal coercion, conspiracy to commit financial fraud, and administering a substance without consent." Caleb looked up. "All 5 charges. Both names." Miller said the DA signed off at 4:15 this afternoon. "Teresa is coming tonight as well." Sophia said, adjusting her earring without looking away from the mirror. I called her yesterday. She drove down this afternoon and met with Miller at 4 o'clock. She brought the notarized envelope. She finally looked at me directly. She wanted to be there, Dad. She needed to finish this too. I finished the knot on my tie and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. 62 years old. Gray at the temples, lines around the eyes, hands that had carried lumber and poured concrete, and held my daughter when she cried, and signed documents I should have read more carefully. I looked like a man who had lived a full and complicated life, which I supposed was exactly what I was. You ready, Dad? Sophia asked. She met my eyes in the mirror, and hers were steady and clear and fiercer than anything I had seen in 30 years of watching her grow up. I have been ready, I said, for longer than I knew. The event hall was everything the invitation had promised. Warm light, soft music from a string quartet in the corner. Round tables draped in white linen, and 100 guests moving through the space with champagne flutes, and the easy laughter of people who believed they were celebrating something real. Victor greeted us at the entrance. He was impeccable charcoal suit, silver tie hair, combed back, the picture of a composed and successful man hosting a party for his parents. He shook my hand with a firm grip and held it one beat longer than necessary, his eyes searching my face for something. Glad you came, Dad, he said. His smile was warm and practiced and did not reach his eyes by approximately half an inch. And I would not have missed it, I said, and smiled back with every muscle in my face while my heart hammered against my ribs. Sylvia appeared at Victor's shoulder in a deep burgundy dress, her pearl necklace at her throat, the same pearl necklace she had been wearing every day this week. I noticed the one her fingers kept finding whenever she felt uncertain. She kissed my cheek, and her lips were cool, and she smelled like the same perfume she had worn for 30 years, and something in my chest twisted so painfully, I had to breathe through it carefully. "Oh, Hector," she said warmly, her hands cupping my face for a brief moment. "You look wonderful. Come, your table is near the front." The evening moved in the slow, suspended way that evenings move when you are waiting for something inevitable. I ate without tasting. I spoke to relatives I had not seen in years, answered questions about my health and my retirement, laughed at the right moments, and watched Victor from across the room work the crowd with the fluid ease of a man who had been performing his entire life. Sophia sat 2 tables away with Caleb, both of them nursing the same glasses of sparkling water. They had arrived with both of them tracking the room the way people track a room when they are not actually there to enjoy it. At 8:45, Victor tapped his champagne glass with a small silver spoon and called for attention. The room quieted, faces turning toward him with the warm expectancy of guests at a celebration. 30 years. Victor said, his voice rich and carrying. 30 years of a family built on sacrifice, on love, and on the kind of commitment most people only dream about. He looked at Sylvia, who pressed one hand to her heart and smiled with eyes that were perfectly professionally moist. Tonight we honor that legacy, and tonight I want to share something very special, a legal arrangement that will protect this family's future for the next 30 years. He reached into his jacket, the silver pen. The same one from my kitchen table 2 nights ago, catching the light, the same way placed on the table in front of me, with the same precise, quiet click, and beside it, the manila folder. Just one signature, Dad. Victor said softly, leaning down close to my ear, his voice warm and private against the background of polite applause from guests who had no idea what they were applauding. Page 12. Right here, right now, in front of the whole family. Let us end this tonight and celebrate properly. My hand moved to the folder. I opened it to page 12. I picked up the silver pen, and then Sophia's voice rose clearly across the room, not shouting, not frantic, but clear and carrying and absolutely certain. the voice of a woman who has spent her entire professional life making data speak, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear it. "Before my father signs anything," she said, standing up from her table, "I think the family deserves to see something first." She held up a small remote. The string quartet stopped. The large screen at the back of the room, the one that had been cycling through 30 years of family photographs, flickered, changed, and filled with a single image. Sylvia's handwriting. The note from 15 years ago. His weakness and our foundation. Projected 6 feet tall across the back wall of a room containing 100 people. Every one of them now completely still and completely silent, except for the sound of champagne flutes being set down very carefully on white linen tablecloths. Victor straightened up slowly from beside my chair. His jaw was rigid. His hand reaching for the silver pen stopped in midair. "Titi, that," Sophia said, her voice steady as bedrock, "is my grandmother's handwriting, instructing my uncle to use my grandfather's trust against him." She clicked the remote again. The AI signature analysis report filled the screen. "And that is the forensic confirmation that every signature on my grandfather's mortgage documents was forged." The room erupted. Victor's hand closed around the silver pen so hard his knuckles went white. And at the back of the hall, the double doors opened. The 2 men who walked through those double doors did not look like police officers. That was the point. They moved with the unhurried confidence of late-arriving guests dressed in dark suits, and if you were not looking for them, you would have missed them entirely. But I had been looking for them since 8 o'clock, cataloging every face near the entrance the way a man catalogs exits when he knows a storm is coming. Victor saw them the same moment I did. I watched his face cycle through 4 expressions in approximately 2 seconds: confusion, recognition, calculation, and then something that collapsed inward like a building whose load-bearing walls have just given way. He took 1 step backward. His shoulder blade hit the table behind him, and he grabbed it hard, champagne glasses rattling with a sound that cut cleanly through the noise of the room. "Victor." One of the officers spoke his name quietly, almost gently, the way you speak to someone standing too close to a ledge. "Please stay where you are. This is a private event." Victor's voice was tight and high, nothing like the warm, carrying tone he had used for his toast 12 minutes ago. "You cannot just walk in here. We have a warrant." The officer produced it from his jacket pocket with the practiced ease of a man who has done this many times. "Victor A. Torres, we need you to come with us." Sylvia rose from the head table. Her burgundy dress caught the light beautifully. Her pearl necklace lay perfectly at her throat. Her face was arranged in an expression of dignified outrage, chin up, eyes wide, the performance of a woman wrongly accused at her own celebration. "This is absolutely outrageous," she said loudly enough for 30 guests to hear clearly. "This is a misunderstanding. I am calling our attorney right now." "Mrs. Torres." The second officer stepped around to her side. "The warrant covers you as well." Sylvia's composure held for exactly 1 more second. Then Sophia clicked the remote again. The screen changed. Not a document. Not a forensic report. Video footage, clear color, shot from approximately chest height, with the slightly wide-angle perspective of a very small embedded lens. My kitchen table. Victor and Sylvia seated across from me 2 nights ago, the manila folder between them, the silver pen catching the overhead light. The audio was clean and crisp. "This does not have to be complicated," Victor's voice said from the screen. "The debt exists, Dad. It is in your name. Fighting it will take years and cost more than the debt itself." A guest near the front made a sharp sound. Someone said something urgent to the person beside them. The string quartet, frozen with instruments half raised since Sophia stood up, collectively lowered their bows. On screen, Sylvia's voice. We are not your enemies. We are your family. This is the cleanest way through this. 100 people watching a private conversation they were never meant to see, playing out across a screen that 30 minutes ago had been cycling through birthday photos and vacation snapshots. Where is that footage from? A male voice called from the middle of the room, an older man, one of the uncles from Sylvia's side of the family. Good question, Sophia said. She reached into her evening bag and produced a clear evidence bag. Inside it, a pearl necklace identical in every visible way to the one at Sylvia's throat, because it was the same necklace. My father gave this to me 3 days ago. We had it for 36 hours before tonight. That was enough time for James Whitfield at Whitfield Digital Forensics in Aurora to install a lens the diameter of a pinhead into the third pearl from the clasp and connect it to a micro-transmitter, no larger than a watch battery. The room erupted not sharp chaos, but a wave of overlapping voices, people turning to each other, with expressions ranging from shock to fury, to the specific bewildered grief of realizing that something you believed was solid has been hollow for a very long time. Sylvia's hand flew to her throat. Her fingers closed around the pearl necklace, and in that moment, with the footage of her own voice playing on the screen behind her, and 100 pairs of eyes on her face, the last layer of her composure came away completely. Her chin crumpled. Her eyes flooded. But what came out of her was not remorse. It was rage, raw and unfiltered, the rage of a woman whose plan has been dismantled by the very instrument she thought she controlled. "Oh, you put a camera on me," she said, her voice shaking violently. "You put a camera on your own mother. You put poison in my father's drink for 18 months, Sophia said. Her voice did not shake at all. "I think we can discuss proportionality another time." The officer stepped closer to Sylvia. "Mrs. Torres, I need you to come with me now." "I am not going anywhere," Sylvia said, her voice rising and cracking at the top. "This is my party. This is my family. I built this family. You built it on my name," I said. I had not planned to speak. The words came from somewhere below, planning somewhere older and more fundamental than strategy. I stood slowly because my legs felt uncertain and heavy the way they had in Teresa's living room, and I looked at the woman I had married 30 years ago in a church in Colorado Springs with $27 in my checking account and more hope than sense. Her eyes met mine across the white linen and the half-empty champagne flutes and the ruins of a celebration that had never been real. 30 years, Sylvia," I said, my voice rough and low and entirely my own. "I loved you with everything I had. And you looked at that love and decided it was a liability to be managed." Her face broke. Not into tears, into something more complicated, a fracturing of the careful architecture she had maintained for 3 decades, every calculated smile and practiced warmth coming apart at once under the weight of being fully, finally seen. "You do not understand," she whispered. "You never understood what I gave up." "Then you should have told me," I said. "That is what people do when they love each other. They tell each other the truth." The officer touched her elbow gently. This time she did not resist. As they walked her toward the door, the pearl necklace still clasped at her throat, I turned back to the table and picked up Victor's silver pen. Heavy, expensive, the kind of pen designed to feel like authority in the hand. I set it down carefully on top of the closed manila folder and pushed both of them away from me. Caleb appeared at my shoulder and put one hand on my back, steady and solid, saying nothing because some moments do not need words. They need presence. And Caleb Owens had always understood the difference. Sophia crossed the room and took my hand. Her fingers were warm and her grip was certain, and she looked at me with eyes that were wet but absolutely undefeated. "It is done," she said softly. At the back of the hall, the screen still glowed. his weakness and our foundation. 6 feet tall, in front of everyone, the room Miller walked into was not the one anyone had planned. The string quartet had packed their instruments away. The waitstaff stood in uncertain clusters near the kitchen entrance, unsure whether to clear the tables or simply wait for someone to tell them what kind of evening this had become. 100 guests sat or stood in small, tight groups, speaking in the low, urgent voices people use when they are trying to make sense of something they witnessed, but have not yet fully processed. Miller moved through the room with the calm, deliberate stride of a woman entirely comfortable in chaos. She was still in her gray blazer from this afternoon. She had not gone home. Behind her came 2 uniformed officers carrying document cases, and behind them, moving more slowly, came a figure whose presence made everything Sophia had planned finally feel real. She wore the brown wool coat she saves for important occasions. Under one arm, she carried a leather document portfolio. At her side walked James Whitfield like a quiet, bespectacled anchor. She looked tired, the specific exhaustion of someone who had been afraid for 15 years and had finally tonight decided to stop. When she saw me, her eyes filled immediately. She crossed the room faster than I expected, and I met her halfway. She grabbed both my arms with both hands and held on with a grip that startled me with its strength. "I should have come sooner," she said, her voice cracking clean down the middle. "Hector, I should have come 15 years ago. I was so afraid I let that fear cost you so much." Her chin trembled violently. "I am so deeply sorry." My throat closed completely. I pulled her in and held her the way I had not held my little sister since we were children in Albuquerque, before life grew complicated and distances widened and families split along invisible lines. "You came tonight," I said, my voice rough and unsteady. "That is what matters." "I brought everything," she whispered against my shoulder, fingers gripping the back of my jacket. "Every single piece. What Victor did to me, what Sylvia planned, it goes back further than you know." I pulled back and looked at her face. "How much further?" Teresa steadied herself with visible effort, lifted her chin, and said, "Let me show you. Let me show everyone." Miller cleared the head table with quiet authority. James connected his laptop to the venue's projector. The screen that had displayed the AI signature report and the kitchen camera footage became something else entirely. It became a timeline. "What you are looking at," James said, his voice carrying clearly across the room, "is a reconstructed timeline of financial activity conducted using the identity of Hector A. Torres, spanning approximately 16 years. Data was recovered from physical documents held by Teresa Torres and digital records extracted from a mobile device belonging to Victor Torres." He clicked to the first point. 16 years ago, Victor Torres, age 17, receives written instruction from Sylvia Torres. James read it aloud. "Get the old man used to signing things without reading. Start small. Build the habit." A woman at a middle table pressed both hands over her mouth. A man nearby rose halfway from his chair, then sat back down as though his legs had made a decision his mind had not caught up with. A low, horrified murmur moved through the room like a current. James clicked forward. 15 years ago. Victor approaches Teresa with a co-investment proposal using forged documents bearing my signature. He never tells her the property carries a fraudulent mortgage in my name. 3 months later, a collections action arrives addressed to her personally. Teresa opened her portfolio and removed the original notice worn at the folds and yellowed at the edges and held it up. 100 people looked at it without making a sound. Teresa Torres paid $47,000 from her personal retirement savings to settle that action. James continued. Victor provided no repayment. He provided instead a written threat that fabricated records existed which would implicate her in the original fraud if she ever spoke. Sophia, seated to my left, made a low sound in her throat, compressed fury held by sheer discipline. She picked up her pen and wrote without looking down, eyes fixed on the screen jaw so tight I could see the tension from where I sat. James clicked again. 10 years ago. The scholarship papers. The blank page overlay. 11 signatures. Coordinated through email fragments recovered from the phone originating from address ST77 registered to Sylvia Torres. James read directly from the slide. He will ask questions if he sees the full document. The blank page overlay will work. He trusts the pen and the hand holding it. That is enough. The room produced a sound that was not quite any single noise, a collective intake, the audible processing of something deeply wrong rendered suddenly visible in plain language. He trusts the pen and the hand holding it. She had written that about me. Sitting somewhere ordinary, a kitchen table, a desk, she had typed those words about the man she shared a bed with, pressed send, and then come to me and smiled the smile I had loved for 30 years. I pressed my fist against my sternum and breathed slowly. Caleb placed his hand on my shoulder from behind steady, solid present, and I was more grateful for that weight than I knew how to say. Teresa stood, a Detective Miller. Her voice carried across the entire room without effort, clear and unhesitating, the voice of a woman who has been afraid for 15 years and has decided tonight that she is done. I have here the original documents Victor gave me. His fingerprints are on these pages. I had them tested 6 years ago by a private laboratory because I needed to know I was not imagining what had been done to me. She placed a sealed, notary-stamped manila envelope on the table in front of Miller. The fingerprints match Victor Torres, not my brother, not me, Victor. Miller picked up the envelope with both hands, examined the seal, and nodded once. Mrs. Torres, she said quietly, this will be entered into evidence tonight. Teresa sat back down. Her hands shook slightly as she closed her portfolio, but her face was composed, and her eyes were clear, the specific clarity of a burden set down after being carried so long. You have forgotten what standing upright without it felt like. James clicked to the final entry on the timeline. 14 months ago, a text from Sylvia Torres to Victor Torres, recovered from a secondary backup chip on the phone's storage. James read it aloud. The doctor has confirmed the prescription. Weekly administration in liquid form will produce sufficient cognitive softening within 60 days. By the anniversary, he will not question anything placed in front of him. It will look like natural decline. Nobody questions an old man's memory. The room made no sound at all. Not a glass, not a chair, not a single breath anyone was willing to let be heard. I had known this was coming. I had read those words. I had given myself time to process them, and still hearing them spoken aloud in a room full of witnesses, in the very venue where Sylvia and Victor had planned to use my chemically softened mind to finish what they started. Tears burned up from somewhere so deep, I had not known they were there. They ran down my face before I could stop them, and I did not try, because some things a man should not have to contain alone in a room full of witnesses. Sophia's hand found mine under the table. She gripped it so hard it ached. I gripped back. Neither of us let go. That is enough for tonight, Miller said quietly. The screen went dark. She turned to the room with measured calm. Several of you may be contacted as witnesses. Please do not discuss tonight's details outside this room until you hear from my office. A brief pause. Thank you for staying. Teresa reached across and took my free hand in hers. I sat between my sister and my daughter, held on both sides by the two women who had walked through the worst of this alongside me. It is over, Teresa said softly, worn down to her truest voice, no performance left, just the bare, honest sound of a woman who has waited 15 years to say 2 words. Not quite, Sophia said. She squeezed my hand once hard, but almost. Outside in the parking structure, Victor and Sylvia sat in separate vehicles. 30 years of their architecture dismantled in a single evening. On the head table of a Cherry Creek event hall, 15 years of evidence sat in neat notarized rows waiting for morning. The envelope arrived by certified mail at 8:47 on a Friday morning, 11 days after the anniversary party. I had been awake since 5. I had made coffee I did not drink, washed dishes that were already clean, and stood at the kitchen window watching the Denver street below come to life one headlight at a time. When the mail carrier's truck stopped outside my building, I already knew what she was carrying. I went downstairs and signed for it myself. Back at the kitchen table, I set the envelope in the center directly under the overhead light, as though better lighting would make what was inside easier to receive, and I sat down and looked at it for 22 minutes without touching it again. Then I called Sophia. She was at my door in 35 minutes, still wearing the jacket she had put on for work that morning, her office badge lanyard still swinging at her neck. She had left the moment my call ended. She came through the door, saw the envelope on the table, and her footsteps stopped completely. "You waited for me," she said. Her voice was soft and careful, the voice she uses when she is trying not to break something. "I was not going to open it alone," I said. She crossed the room, pulled out the chair across from me, and sat down. She looked at the envelope. She looked at my face. She looked at the envelope again, and I could see her reading everything she needed to know in the way I was holding myself too still, too careful, the stillness of a man bracing for impact. "Do you want me to open it?" she asked. "No," I said. "I need to do it myself." I picked it up. My hands were not steady. I want to be honest about that. My hands were shaking in the small, persistent way they shake when the body understands something the mind is still catching up to. I ran my thumb under the seal, slowly, the way I used to open birthday cards when I was young enough to believe that whatever was inside would always be something good. The report was 3 pages. I did not read the first 2, the allele comparisons, the locus charts, the columns of statistical probability, designed to drain emotion from devastating facts. I turned directly to the summary on page 3, where the laboratory had written everything in plain language for people like me. Based on the STR analysis of 16 genetic loci, the probability of paternity of Hector A. Torres with respect to the tested male individual is 0.00%. The tested male individual is excluded as the biological offspring of Hector A. Torres. This conclusion is held to a scientific certainty of 99.9999%, 0.00%. I read it once. I read it again. I read it a third time, because some sentences require 3 readings before the brain agrees to accept them as real. Then I set the paper down very carefully on the table, the way you set down something fragile, even though the fragile thing was not the paper at all. Sophia leaned forward and read it. I watched her face while she did. I watched her jaw go tight, her nostrils flare. Her eyes fill with tears so fast it was like watching a glass overfill, no warning, no gradual rise, just suddenly full and spilling over. She pressed her lips together until they went white, fighting it back with everything she had. She lost that fight. The tears ran down her face freely, and she reached across the table and grabbed both of my hands in hers and held them so hard, I felt my knuckles compress. "Dad," she said. Just that. Just my name. In a voice that carried 33 years of a story neither of us had known we were living inside. My throat closed. I had to breathe through it carefully, deliberately, like a man navigating a narrow passage in the dark. "And 33 years," I said. "I raised that boy for 33 years, Sophia." "I know," she whispered. Her chin was trembling so hard her whole jaw shook with it. I know, Dad. I taught him to drive, I said, and my voice came apart a little on the word drive, fraying at the edges the way old rope frays when it has been pulled too many times. In the parking lot behind the hardware store on Academy Boulevard, he kept riding the clutch. I kept telling him, feel for the catch, do not force it. I pressed my fist against my mouth, held it there for a moment. He laughed when he finally got it. He slapped the steering wheel and looked at me like I had just handed him something real. My eyes were burning so badly I could barely see the report on the table between us. I thought I had. Sophia made a sound that broke open somewhere in the middle half. Sob half something fiercer than grief. She shook her head hard, tears flying from her cheeks, and tightened her grip on my hands until I could feel her pulse in my fingers. You did give him something real, she said, her voice raw and certain at the same time. You gave him everything a father gives a son. What he chose to do with it, that is not your fault. It was never your fault. Do you hear me? I nodded. I was not sure I believed it yet. But I have learned in the past 11 days that sometimes you have to accept a truth before you can feel it. You hold it in your hands, and you say yes, and you trust that the feeling will come later when the body finally catches up with what the mind has been forced to know. Detective Miller called at 10:15. She was characteristically direct. No preamble, no cushioning, just the facts, delivered in the precise, even voice of a woman who respects the people she is talking to enough to give them the truth without decoration. The DNA results have been entered into evidence, she said. The DA's office has confirmed they are proceeding with all 5 charges against Victor Torres and all 5 charges against Sylvia Torres. Wire fraud, identity theft, criminal coercion, conspiracy to commit financial fraud, and administering a substance without consent. She paused. There is something else. Something we found during the search of the residence on Holloway Lane yesterday morning. I pressed the phone against my ear so hard it ached. Across the table, Sophia put her pen to her legal pad without being asked. Tell me, I said. A safety deposit box key, Miller said. Registered to a branch in Lakewood. We executed the access warrant this morning. Inside the box was a handwritten document dated 25 years ago, written by Sylvia Torres. In it, she describes her motivation for entering the marriage. My stomach dropped so fast I grabbed the table edge. 25 years ago, Miller continued. Your testimony in a civil subcontractor case contributed to the bankruptcy of her father's construction company. Sylvia Torres wrote in this document that she entered the marriage with the explicit intention of recovering what she considered her family's losses. She describes a 20-year financial plan using your identity and your assets. Miller's voice went very careful and very precise. She describes Victor, then a child she was raising as, and I am quoting her exact words, the instrument of final recovery. The kitchen tilted. The walls leaned inward by an inch. I breathed through it. She planned this before we were married, I said. My voice came out flat, stripped of inflection, the voice of a man whose capacity for shock has been entirely used up. She walked into that church in Colorado Springs with 27-year-old me and a plan already written in a box in Lakewood. The document confirms that yes, Miller said. Mr. Torres, what was done to you was not opportunistic. It was not impulsive. It was a deliberate, multi-decade conspiracy executed over 30 years, initiated before your marriage even began. The law takes an extremely serious view of that level of premeditation. I set the phone on speaker. My arm had stopped being fully reliable and I did not trust it. Sophia was writing fast, her pen moving across the legal pad in tight, urgent lines, her jaw set and her eyes blazing with a fury so clean it was almost beautiful. "Victor," I said. "What about Victor?" Miller paused, the specific pause of a person choosing their words with care. When he was informed of the DNA results this morning, he requested his attorney and declined all further questioning. Another pause. But before he stopped talking, he said one thing. Her voice shifted quieter, more careful, carrying the weight of something that exists outside legal categories. He said, "She told me he was nothing. She told me since I was a child that he was nothing and we were owed everything. I believed her. I believed everything she told me." The kitchen went very still. Outside, a car passed slowly on the street below. A bird called twice from somewhere in the yard next door. The refrigerator ran its quiet, indifferent hum, the same hum it had been running through every conversation in this kitchen for 6 years, completely unaware of any of it. I thought about a 17-year-old boy receiving a text message from his mother. Get the old man used to signing things without reading. Start small. Build the habit. A boy told from the time he was old enough to understand language that the man who drove him to school and coached him through a parking lot on Saturday mornings and carried boxes up 2 flights of stairs on a bad knee was nothing. Was an obstacle. Was a resource to be spent. He was a child, I said. Not to Miller, to Sophia, to the kitchen. To the 33 years of a story I was only now reading from the outside. Whatever he became, she built that into him the way someone builds a weapon, deliberately, carefully, over years. That does not excuse what he did, Sophia said. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were not. He was an adult making choices, Dad. He chose every single one of them. I know, I said. But it explains it. And I think I stopped. I looked at the DNA report on the table between us at those 6 decimal places of scientific certainty. I think that is its own kind of grief. Grieving a son who was never mine, and grieving the version of him that could have existed if someone had not gotten there first with a different story. Sophia stood up. She walked around the table and she put her arms around me from behind her chin, resting on the top of my head, the way she used to do when she was 12 years old and trying to make me laugh by pretending she was taller than me. I put my hands over hers. Outside the kitchen window, Denver went about its ordinary Friday morning traffic and coffee and people walking dogs and the distant sound of construction on the next block. The sound of something being built. I had built things my whole life, honestly and carefully, with the pride that comes from knowing your work will outlast you. And here in my kitchen, with my daughter's arms around me, I was still standing. That was enough for now. It had to be. The Denver County Courthouse on Colfax Avenue is not a beautiful building. It is large and gray, and deliberately imposing the kind of architecture designed to remind everyone who walks through its doors that what happens inside matters, that the weight of what is decided in these rooms is real and lasting, and not subject to the particular preferences of the people standing before it. I had driven past it 100 times in 30 years. I had never had reason to go inside. I went inside on a Tuesday morning in late October, 3 weeks after the anniversary party, wearing the same suit I had worn to the party itself. Sophia noticed and started to say something, then stopped herself. She understood, I think, that it was deliberate. I wanted to close the loop. I wanted to walk into that courthouse in the clothes I had been wearing when the story finally broke open, and walk back out in them when the first chapter of Justice was formally recorded. Caleb drove us. He was in civilian clothes, off-duty by choice, present by decision, the way he had been present at every point in this story that mattered. He found parking 2 blocks east, and we walked together in the October cold, our breath making small clouds in the air, the mountains visible to the west above the roofline, white-capped and enormous and entirely indifferent to whatever was about to happen in a courthouse on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Teresa met us on the steps. She was wearing the brown wool coat again, and she had done something with her hair that made her look more like the sister I remembered from 20 years ago, before fear had settled into her posture and made her smaller than she was. She stood straight. Her chin was up. She had driven down from Fort Collins alone at 6 in the morning because she had told me on the phone the night before. I need to be there, Hector. I need to see it. You look good, I told her. She laughed, a real laugh surprised out of her, the kind that involves the whole face and cannot be faked. I look terrified, she said, her eyes bright and wet at the same time. But I am here. Same thing sometimes, Caleb said, and held the door open for all of us. The arraignment courtroom was smaller than I had imagined. Wood paneling, fluorescent lighting, rows of bench seating that reminded me uncomfortably of the church in Colorado Springs, where I had gotten married 30 years ago. The gallery filled steadily Detective Miller and two members of her team, the DA's associate attorney, James Whitfield, in his wire-rimmed glasses and quiet suit. Mr. Crane was already at the defense table, his briefcase open, papers arranged with the tight precision of a man who knows his case is difficult and has decided that organization is the closest available substitute for optimism. Victor was brought in from a side door at 9:04. He was wearing a gray detention uniform, and the contrast with the charcoal blazer and silver tie of the anniversary party was so complete it felt almost theatrical. Like the same actor in two entirely different productions, the costume change revealing something the better clothes had been designed to conceal. He was thinner than he had been 3 weeks ago. His face was drawn, the composed, expensive-looking surface worn down to something rawer underneath. He moved with the careful, reduced quality of a person who has learned very recently that the space available to them is significantly smaller than it used to be. He did not look at me when he entered. He looked at the floor, then at Mr. Crane, then at his own hands folded on the table. His jaw was tight. His shoulders were held with the rigid discipline of a man fighting to maintain the last fragment of dignity available in a gray detention uniform on a Tuesday morning. I watched him and felt not satisfaction, not triumph. Something quieter and more complicated than either of those things. The specific grief of recognizing someone you once loved in a place and condition that cannot be undone. Sylvia was brought in 2 minutes later from a different door on the opposite side of the room. She had been released on bond and was dressed in her own clothes. A dark gray blazer hair, pinned back pearl earrings at her ears, because the pearl necklace was in an evidence bag in Detective Miller's office. She walked in with her chin up and her expression carefully composed, and for one moment, just one, I saw the woman I had married 30 years ago in that church in Colorado Springs. The set of her jaw, the deliberate quality of her carriage, the way she moved through a room as though she had already decided what the room was going to think of her. Then she sat down beside Mr. Crane, and the distance between us was the full width of a courtroom and 30 years of everything that had been built, and everything that had been built on top of it, and everything that had now collapsed. And I felt the weight of all of it at once in my chest, heavy and specific and entirely real. She looked at me, across the courtroom, across everything. For the first time since the anniversary party, her eyes found mine and held them. I did not look away. I had spent 30 years not looking closely enough. I was done with that now. The judge entered at 9:15. The room rose and sat with the procedural choreography of a system that has been doing this for a very long time. The charges were read aloud by the clerk, and hearing them in that room, each count numbered, precisely worded, delivered in a flat, institutional voice, was an experience so different from reading them on Detective Miller's conference table that I had to grip the bench seat in front of me to stay anchored in the present tense. Count 1, wire fraud, in violation of Title 18 United States Code, Section 1343. Count 2, identity theft, in violation of Title 18 United States Code, Section 1028. Count 3, criminal coercion in violation of Colorado Revised Statutes. Section 188740. Count 4, conspiracy to commit financial fraud in violation of Title 18 United States Code, Section 371. Count 5, administering a substance without consent in violation of Colorado Revised Statutes, Section 183414. 5 counts. Victor's name, then Sylvia's name, then each count again for each of them. The clerk's voice was entirely flat, and entirely even no judgment in the tone, all of the judgment in the words themselves. Mr. Crane entered pleas of not guilty for both defendants. The DA's associate attorney rose and argued for continued detention of Victor Torres' flight risk scope of conspiracy 16-year criminal enterprise. She spoke for 11 minutes without notes, precise and comprehensive. Mr. Crane responded with everything he had. When it was done, the judge looked at both tables for a long moment, with the expression of someone who has already made a decision and is simply completing the required form of deliberation. Bail denied for Victor Torres. Bail conditions set for Sylvia Torres. Ankle monitoring, surrender of passport. No contact with Hector Torres, Sofia Torres, or Teresa Torres. Victor's jaw tightened, but he did not move. Sylvia closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds, then opened them and straightened in her chair with the reflexive composure of a woman who has spent 30 years making sure no room ever saw her flinch. Teresa, sitting to my right, exhaled a breath that seemed to come from somewhere 15 years deep. Her hand found my arm and squeezed once hard, and then her smile broke across her face, real and unguarded and wide, the first smile like that I had seen from her in years, bright, with a relief so large, it spilled out of her eyes as tears, even while her lips were still curving upward. Hector, she whispered, her voice completely undone and not caring at all. It is happening. It is actually happening. Sofia on my left was already crying. Not the fought-back tears of the last 2 weeks, but the open, ungoverned kind. The kind that comes when the thing you have been bracing against for so long finally gives way and your body just lets go of all of it at once. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, gave up on that immediately, and let her shoulders shake her other hand locked so tight in Caleb's that her knuckles had gone white. Caleb looked straight ahead at the judge's bench with his jaw set and his eyes bright, the specific expression of a man who is feeling a great deal and has decided that his job right now is to be the thing that does not move the fixed point that the people he loves can lean against. I looked up at the high, narrow windows along the side wall of the courtroom. A strip of Colorado sky, blue and cold and enormous, the kind of blue that makes you understand why people have always looked up when they needed to remember what is larger than their immediate suffering. I had come to Colorado at 24 years old with $1,100 and a belief that honest work was enough. That a man who built things carefully and kept his word and loved his family well would be sufficient. I had been wrong about some of that. I had been wrong in ways that had cost me 30 years and $300,000 and 18 months of my own clear mind. But I was here, 62 years old, sitting in a Denver courthouse on a Tuesday morning in October with my daughter on one side and my sister on the other, and the man who had spent 16 years dismantling my life was sitting in a gray uniform 12 feet away, and the system that I had always been told was there to protect people like me was today in this room doing exactly that. The judge gathered her papers. The clerk called the next case. I stood up with my daughter and my sister and the man who was going to marry Sofia in the spring, and we walked back out through the doors of the Denver County Courthouse onto Colfax Avenue, into the October cold, into the enormous blue Colorado sky. Teresa grabbed my arm and held it with both hands as we walked, her shoulder pressed against mine, the way she used to walk beside me when we were children in Albuquerque, and the world was still mostly ahead of us. "What do we do now?" she asked. I looked up at those mountains, white and permanent, and entirely themselves, the same mountains that had been standing over this city since long before any of us arrived with our $1,100 and our hope and our complicated families. "We go home," I said, "and we start again." Spring came to Denver the way it always does, not gently, not all at once, but in arguments. A warm Tuesday followed by a cold Thursday, then 3 days of sunshine so clean and bright it made the whole city look newly washed. I stood at my kitchen window one April morning, watching a construction crew pour a foundation 2 blocks away, and felt something move through my chest that I had not felt in a very long time. I felt like myself again. Dr. Anita Reyes at Denver Health cleared me 6 weeks after the arraignment. She ran the full cognitive battery, came back into the examination room, smiling, and put her hand over mine on the desk. "Your mind is yours again, Mr. Torres," she said firmly. "It was always yours. Someone just temporarily borrowed it without permission." I laughed out loud, a real laugh, the first genuine one in months. Dr. Reyes laughed too, and for that moment, the examination room felt like the most ordinary and wonderful place in the world. The legal outcomes arrived in pieces. Victor was convicted on all 5 counts in February. 14 years with mandatory restitution of $312,000 to be paid to Hector A. Torres. When Sophia read me that figure at my kitchen table, her finger moving slowly under each word, her voice broke completely. "That is your money, Dad," she said, wiping her face with the back of her hand and not caring at all that she was crying. "That was always your money." I got up and walked to the window. My eyes burned so badly I could not see the street for a full minute. 62 years of honest work finally confirmed as real. Sylvia pleaded guilty in March. 8 years, 3 suspended, minimum 5 served. The $300,000 mortgage was cleared from my credit record in late March. Sophia called me at 7:30 in the morning, and I could hear everything in her first syllable. "Shocking, it is gone, Dad," she said, and her voice broke immediately on the second word. Completely gone. I sat down on the kitchen floor, right there back against the cabinet because my legs had made a decision my mind had not caught up with yet. I pressed the phone to my ear and listened to my daughter cry, and I cried too, not quietly, not with any dignity, but the way a man cries when everything he built honestly finally gets confirmed as real. "I thank you," I told her when I could speak, "for all of it. From the very first night. You would have done the same for me," she said softly. "You always have." The morning of Sophia's wedding arrived quietly, slipping through the curtains, before I had fully decided to be awake. I lay in bed, listening to Denver wake up a car, starting below a dog, barking, the distant sound of a construction crew already building something, the sound of it as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. I was 62 years old. I had lost a wife, a son, 18 months of my own clear mind, and a 30-year marriage that had been, from its very first day, something other than what I believed it to be. And this morning, I was walking my daughter down an aisle in the Rocky Mountain foothills, into the arms of a man who had looked at me on a highway at dawn with 3 police cruisers and said without hesitation, "Tell me what you need." I got up, made coffee, stood at the window. I know now that trust is not the same thing as blindness. Looking closely is not suspicion, it is attention. And attention is one of the deepest forms of love a human being can offer. Sylvia built her entire plan around my willingness to not look. I carry that knowledge the way a builder carries the memory of a wall that failed not with shame, but with the understanding of how to build the next one so it holds. I know now that what survives when everything is removed is worth knowing. My daughter is shaking hands and has a steady voice. My sister with tamales and 15 years of evidence. A future son-in-law on a highway at dawn. A forensic specialist in a Victorian house. A detective who filed a motion by 5 o'clock. A DMV clerk named Patricia who was personally outraged on my behalf. The inner circle was the danger. The strangers were the salvation. At 9:30, I pinned a white gardenia to my lapel, picked up my truck keys, and walked out into the May morning. Teresa was waiting by the truck in a yellow dress, her face turned up to the sun, with her eyes closed, smiling to herself the way people smile when they have just remembered something good. She opened her eyes when she heard my footsteps. Her smile widened into something that took over her whole face, bright and unguarded, and entirely, completely alive. "Ready?" She said, her voice warm and ringing out into the morning like something long overdue. I looked at her, at the yellow dress, at the mountains beyond the roofline, white at the peaks and green at the shoulders, standing exactly where they had always been. My eyes burned in the good way, the full way, the way they burn when a man realizes that what he is feeling right now is gratitude. Raw, bone deep, unreserved. For the morning. For the mountains. For the daughter waiting in the foothills. For every stranger who showed up. For the fact that he is still here to feel any of it at all. "Ready?" I said. And I meant it completely. We drove west toward the mountains, so that is my story. A grandpa story that I never planned to tell and could not have imagined living through. But here I am, still standing on the other side of it, and if there is one thing 62 years and everything that came after has taught me, it is this. Trust is not the same as blindness. Love is not the same as looking away. And the people who are closest to you are not automatically the people who are safe. I want to say something to anyone watching who has a family story of their own. Maybe one that feels too heavy to carry alone, maybe one that looks nothing like what you believed it was. Do not do what I did. Do not spend 30 years giving your trust freely and your eyes closed. Look closely at the people around you, not with suspicion, with attention. Because attention is the most honest form of love there is. My personal belief, and I will stand by it, is that no plan built on deception ever truly holds. I have seen it now with my own eyes. What is built on lies eventually collapses. What is built honestly, even slowly, even with worn hands and a bad knee and $1,100, that is the foundation that holds. I am a simple man. I built walls my whole life. I believe God put those walls in my hands for a reason. And I believe He also put Sophia, Teresa, and Caleb in my life for a reason to be there when my own walls came down. This grandpa's story is not just mine. It is every family story where someone stayed silent too long out of fear, and every family story where someone finally decided that the truth was worth more than the peace. If any part of this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something, think something, or remember something of your own, leave a comment below and let me know. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe in stories that are honest even when they are hard, consider subscribing so you never miss the next one. Every story I tell is told with one purpose: to make sure nobody has to carry theirs alone. Thank you deeply for staying with me until the very end of this story. It means more than I can say. A gentle heads up before you go: the stories coming up on this channel contain some fictional elements crafted with the purpose of carrying real lessons. If that is not the kind of content you are looking for, no hard feelings at all, please feel free to step away and find something that speaks to you better. But if you are still here, I am glad you are. See you in the next one.